to a guy who has a very popular podcast. He shared with us before the show that he has, I think, over 100,000 downloads on the show. It's called Around the Political World with John Rothmann. He is a lecturer, author, historian, and a former KGO talk show host. Here he is, John Rothmann, everybody. Hey, John.
Hey, Mark. Hey, I want you to know I'm happy to sign for you the book that I co-authored. Who knows what the value might really be in that case?
Oh, yes. That's right. I love that. And what is that book called, John?
Icon of Evil, Hitler's Mufti and the Rise of Radical Islam. And it is still selling very well, I'm delighted to say.
You may want to turn John up just a little bit, Albert. I will tell you, John, that that's an interesting story that I'd like to get into maybe another time because we have so much stuff to get into. Sure. But the relationship that you draw out in that book between the Nazis, Hitler, and factions in the Middle East. So let's get to things going on in this country first, if I can, please.
Excellent. Sure.
Yeah. Now, the news of the moment is regarding Kevin McCarthy. And I saw a comment before, sort of a comment on my comment, as McCarthy's decided to resign, prior to, his term being completely served. My point was, wow, it's a thin majority the Republicans have that's gotten even thinner. Someone said in the chat, it's a GOP district. He'll likely be replaced by a GOP congressperson. That's true. But their majority for the moment does get thinner, doesn't it?
It sure does. And McCarthy's departure is not necessarily unexpected. Unlike Nancy Pelosi, who continues to be there as a former speaker, there is precedent, as you know. John Boehner resigned his seat. We know that this is not unusual for a former speaker. So I'm not at all surprised. It does narrow the majority, and given the fact that George Santos is no longer in Congress, it does narrow the margin.
By the way, on the Santos thing, were you for getting rid of him?
Yes, I would. If I'd been a member of Congress, I would have voted to remove him.
And on the Trump removal of the name from the ballot, which doesn't appear to be happening necessarily, but I'm just curious on this removal thing, were you for that?
I've said from day one that was irresponsible and wrong. If Donald Trump is going to be removed, it should be by the voters, not by the courts.
Okay, you and I are in agreement on that. Now, to the Tommy Tuberville thing. He was blocking 400 military promotions. We've spoken about it on the show. You've spoken about it on your podcast. And I wonder if you can give me some thoughts on the fact that he's now finally relented on this. He was protesting Pentagon policy that, facilitates abortions for service members and dependents of service members. Speak to this, if you would, please.
Well, he's unblocked almost everything, but not the senior service leaders. He wants them to be approved on individual votes in the Senate. But Tuberville basically had to bow to the Republican Party. There was such opposition from Republicans in the United States Senate that I think he felt a lot of pressure. Now he can say, well, you see, I accomplished something. But in fact, Tuberville, I would say that what he did was a shameful act that hurt American national security. And that, in the end, is what Republicans in the Senate conveyed to him.
I want to speak, if I can, John, about while we're still in Congress, and then I'll get to Trump a little bit, and then we'll talk about anti-Semitism a little bit, because I think it's a intriguing and awful situation that is evolving worldwide. But while we're on the Hill, while we're in the legislatures, I wonder if you could speak to the budget and what's happening with that. I mean, this country does need to approve a budget.
Look, you have a Speaker of the House of Representatives who is not particularly strong, who is very far to the right, and we can talk more about him, the introduction to the book that he wrote, which is absolutely a disgrace. The Republicans have a severe problem. They're going to have to deal with it because what the Republicans promised was if they had the House majority, they would govern. And it is clear they have been unable to do that. So I think the Republicans are going to have to get, if you'll pardon a bad pun, their house in order. And it's going to take a real struggle to do that. I don't think Speaker Johnson by the way, is a creditable force. And there's a lot of criticism now. You may know, you may have heard that next week, the Republicans are going to vote in the House on the impeachment of Joe Biden. And the argument is being made that only by an impeachment can you really get to the nub of all of the corruption in what is called the Biden family or the Biden crime family. My suggestion is that's really a very bad idea. It will speak well to Sean Hannity and Mark Levin and others on the far right. But to mainstream America, I don't think it flies. But that's Speaker Johnson, who announced yesterday that he felt that the impeachment resolution would come up next week. By the way, when you're in the Amazon, they wouldn't dare do it if you were in the United States of America.
John, do you think that he might suffer the same fate McCarthy suffered?
I mean, anything can happen. The Republicans are in such disarray in the House, and Liz Cheney's new book describes it. It's her story of the dysfunctionality of the Republicans. And all I can tell you is they have a problem. And if they have a problem, we have a problem. The President of the United States spoke just a few hours ago about aid to Ukraine. The Republicans are blocking aid to Ukraine. They are tying it to the southern border appropriations. It's frankly the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. By the way, that affects aid to Israel as well. The president wants a combined Ukraine-Israel package. The Republicans don't want it. It continues to get stuck in the mud, if you will. But the bottom line is the Ukrainians need our help if we don't give it to them. The Latvians, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, all the people who have been profoundly affected, they will remember the Republicans in the fall. And if you're talking about the Midwest, where those voting blocs have real power, the Republicans had better think about what they're doing.
Let me press you a little bit on that, John. You know, the border funds, why is that an issue? I mean, I understand the gamesmanship and the issues when you tie these two things together. I mean, supposedly this guy Johnson wants everything separated, and yet he's linked these two things. Clearly, it's political gamesmanship, right?
It's theater. It's political theater.
Okay, exactly.
But in the end,
but shouldn't there be money that should be attached to some kind of plan at the border?
Oh, there is. There's money appropriated for border security, but the Republicans don't feel border security goes far enough. I think they'd like to do what Donald Trump has suggested. Let's round them up and deport them. I mean, this is the kind of rhetoric that the Republicans are using to ignite their base, and that Donald Trump most assuredly is using to keep his supporters, throwing them red meat is what he's doing.
Well, what they'd really like to do, John, wouldn't you agree, is to do nothing, continue to use the border as a cudgel politically, and be able to, pass it on down the way. There's no real commitment to solutions at the border.
Mark,
as you say, it's a lot of grandstanding.
I am shocked. You are so cynical. It's time for a vacation, Mark. I say send them all to the Amazon with Mark Thompson.
All right, so that's what's going on Capitol Hill. Now, quickly, a moment on Trump. He's talked increasingly about what he might do, revenge against his enemies. He wants to take revenge against the media. Bannon's spoken of revenge against the media, those who he feels are unpatriotic. And, this is a scary kind of walk that he's walking. But again, he is unapologetic, and in his conversation with Sean Hannity during this town hall event in Iowa, this is just last night, he talked about the fact that on day one of a new administration, if he gets into office, he planned to act like a dictator only on that day. After that, it's the oddest thing. Literally, the media has been focused on this and attacking you, said Hannity. Under no circumstances you are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody. I'm reading this exactly as it's written. Trump said, would never abuse power as retribution against anybody. Trump, except for day one. Look, he's going crazy. Hannity, meaning, I want to close the border and I want to drill, drill, drill. Hannity quickly attempted to rein in Trump's remarks by saying, that's not retribution. Hannity says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? Trump replied, I said, no, 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 no. Other than day one, we're closing the border and we're drilling, drilling, drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
Yeah,
I just think Trump's coming unglued, I think.
I talked about that on my podcast because while that was going on, parallel was Liz Cheney on CNN talking to Anderson Cooper. And what a contrast. What I titled my podcast this morning is A Tale of Two Americas. That's what it boils down to. And it depends on who you believe. Donald Trump is revealing what he intends to do. I worked for Richard Nixon, Mark. I know what an enemies list is, and that is precisely what Donald Trump is saying. He will weaponize the Justice Department. He will put people in charge in justice who will go after his political enemies. And if that doesn't scare the living beekeepers, even out of Trump's supporters, I don't know what will. So it's a serious question. Tonight, there will be a so-called debate. It's not a debate. It's a discussion, cattle show with the four remaining Republicans. And it'll be very interesting to see whether they decide to go after Trump. Will Nikki Haley go after him? Will Ron DeSantis go after him? Will Ramaswamy? God, I don't know. I don't care what Ramaswamy does. And there is no doubt that the former governor of New Jersey, who is the constant critic, Chris Christie, of Donald Trump, is going to hit him hard. But it'll be interesting to watch that particular broadcast. But you know the amazing thing, Mark? I don't think it's going to make any difference at all, because clearly the people who are going to vote for Trump are going to vote for Trump, and that's it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But what I heard on Sean Hannity's interview program last night was as disturbing as anything could be. And I must tell you, I cannot imagine anyone with a grain of sense voting for someone who would make the kinds of statements that Donald Trump has made. It's just mind-boggling and very disturbing, frankly. When Joe Biden says it's a struggle for democracies, he's right. And I should make a note of his comment yesterday that he is really running to stop Donald Trump. He believes he can beat Donald Trump. Although as he was walking out, somebody asked him, "Are you the only one who can beat Donald Trump?" He said, "No, but I'm going to beat Donald Trump." And I think that's the key.
Well, he clearly feels, and as you say, he just sort of freshly articulated the fact that he feels he's the guy to do it again, in effect, even as his poll numbers lag. Let me ask you about, just because of our limited time, the White House now, just today, is coming out along with members of Congress scolding the presidents of Harvard, UPenn, MIT, for their responses in these hearings about anti-Semitism on their campus and at their universities. All the presidents were asked if a call for the genocide of Jewish people would be considered harassment under the campus policies as they sit at those universities I just mentioned. And none of the trio answered the question. They all said it would need to be investigated by the school and depend on the context and how pervasive the calls were. The White House said it's unbelievable that this needs to be said. Calls for genocide are monstrous and antithetical to everything we represent as a country. Any statements that advocate for the systematic murder of Jews are dangerous and revolting, and we should all stand firmly against them on the side of human dignity and the most basic values that unite us as Americans. It's remarkable, though, John, that this conversation even has to be had.
Well, you and I have talked about this. Kim has been included in that conversation. I know that some people viewed my statements to you about this problem as being somewhat extreme or overreaction. I just want to indicate it's not an overreaction. It is completely valid. But what is happening on college campuses today, and the fact that these university presidents, leaders in the education community, refused to say the words that needed to be said, should shock and disturb every American. And if you wonder why, Jews in America, and I include myself in that number, are worried about the security of our community, the community of Jews, whether it's synagogues or Jewish community centers, wherever it may be. You heard what happened up in Mercer Island in Washington. I know you have listeners from Mercer Island. Their synagogue was desecrated with the most obscene Jew-hating rhetoric. And this is now becoming a phenomenon that is real. May I tell you quickly this? I had an email yesterday from a very dear friend whose father was the chairman of the Democratic Party here in California. I've known her for years. One of her sons is on President Biden's staff. For the first time in her life, she recounted in the email to me that She did not admit to being a Jew when she was confronted because she was afraid. And let me tell you, she is a fearless individual. And that tells you everything. When you have people saying, take off your Stars of David, take the mezuzah off your door, don't wear a yarmulke, out of fear. And I know we don't have time to do it. Take a look at what happened in Oakland. Take a look at what happened in Hayward at the city council meetings. Take a look at what happened yesterday at the Board of Supervisors here in the city and county of San Francisco. And you understand the fear and the anger and the frustration that is now evident in the Jewish community. I've quoted Eric Hoffer to you before, but that great longshoreman philosopher said the problem of the world is they expect the Jews to be the only real Christians in the world. And that's not going to happen in this case. And the fact that it's acknowledged by members of the Senate, by members of the House, by the President of the United States, and by public officials throughout the country should be alarming to every single individual, Jew and Gentile. Somebody pointed out to me, if Jesus were alive today, remember, he was a nice Jewish boy.
Well, I just want to go back to what you just were talking about because I think it's interesting and I wanted to ask you about it. I mean, this in the Bay Area, this show was born out of the Bay Area and Bay Area radio came to YouTube, and now we have an audience that extends beyond that. But I still pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the Bay Area, of course. And the Richmond City Council meeting to debate the merits of this resolution calling for a ceasefire. You mentioned, Hayward, Richmond, et cetera. These are all cities in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'm wondering why cities and various city councils, it's not just the Bay Area, it's happening nationwide, feel the need to take this stuff up to begin with, especially cities with so many problems. I mean, you've got a lawlessness, homelessness, all of these things that are ongoing issues, stubborn issues in cities that really require immediate attention, and yet you're taking up the Middle East situation. It seems like it's a virtue signaling or some crap along those lines.
Oh, it's votes. It's votes. If you have communities with large Arab and Muslim communities, and yes, large Jewish communities, you have to be aware of what your constituents want. And I've been an activist, as you know, on the local level, state level, national level, for many, many years. It is not unusual. This has happened before. Many of you will recall the anti-Israel measures which were on the ballot in Berkeley and in San Francisco back in the 1970s and 80s. So this is not new. I had an email this morning from a buddy of mine who lives in Massachusetts, and actually the city council declined to put this on the ballot or have this discussed. But that's few and far between. So all I can tell you is it is a growing phenomenon. And if I, as a political activist, understand that you can make a national issue or an international issue a local issue and garner votes, people do that. I want to remind you in Michigan, which was a very closely decided in the last presidential election, that Joe Biden carried Michigan very narrowly. And one of the reasons he carried that community, that state, was because of the Muslim vote. The Muslims would not vote for Donald Trump, who wanted to do a Muslim ban, if you remember, in the opening days of his administration. Well,
John,
now there's a problem because Biden is so pro-Israel. So, there's an ambivalence.
I want to double back to two things.
Sure.
You're right about Arab constituencies or constituencies that might respond to these to things being brought up before the city council. Will you help remind me and everyone? Is the San Francisco City Council similarly made up of those who have to handle those constituencies? I didn't realize there was this massive Palestinian, Arab, whatever community.
San Francisco is made up of a board of supervisors. It's the only city and county in California, and it's 11 districts. So each supervisor represents a district. I, by the way, would go back to citywide elections. I think it's much better, but we've got districts, and there are organized forces. Let me remind you, it's just not Arab and Muslim community. It's left of center activists.
That's what's going on. And
Democratic
that's what I wanted
socialists
to get to.
and so forth.
Thank you.
And look, I was very close to Bayard Rustin, who was one of the leaders of the Social Democrats in America. He and I worked together on many projects. And Bayard, who organized the Civil Rights March in Washington in 1963 for Martin Luther King Jr., and who was gay, so everybody knows that was one of the problems that Bayard had in those days, he was avidly pro-Israel. When the United Nations passed a resolution equating Zionism with racism on November 10th, 1975, Bayard Rustin fired back with an article, Why I'm a Zionist. And one of the moments that I had and shared with him was at the Western Wall in Jerusalem in 1982, in the summer of 82. And he said to me, I will always stand with Israel, John. I'm a black man who understands what persecution is. So this is something that is a phenomenon. But may I just say, so everybody understands this is not the paranoia of John Rothmann. This is a genuine fear based on fact, which can be heard among Jews and the Jewish community throughout the United States and, yes, Europe as well. The virus, may I describe it this way? I described it this way the other night in a talk I gave for the first time. It just came to me in the middle of the talk. It's like shingles. It's like shingles. Jew hatred is part of the fabric of many, but on occasion, it emerges with all of the vituperative language and hate that we now experience. And unfortunately, there is a vaccine against shingles. There is no vaccine against Jew hatred.
John, in our, but I'm going to just go back to the fact that in San Francisco, hey, guys, all you soups or whatever, you have got big issues in San Francisco. Big, okay? Massive issues. The city is losing conference business. The city is losing tourist business. The city is losing the luster of this magical place, San Francisco, that I love. And that you are taking up in your city council this crap about, what does it have to do with San Francisco would be the question I have. And I would feel the same way if you were voting for Israel, against Israel. I don't care. What the hell are you doing talking about the Middle East? You guys, there are people shooting up and urinating publicly on the streets of San Francisco. Clean it up.
I agree with you, but I also understand the practical realities. Whether it was the civil rights movement, whether it was the war in Vietnam, whether it was the Iraq war, local, and I'm just using those as examples, the San Francisco community, the Board of Supervisors, it inevitably takes a stand. I have to tell you, it's not that I object to their taking positions as individuals, or even if they wanted to pass a resolution. But when you see the virulence, the vituperation, the hatred that is expressed, let me remind you, I don't know if I told you this story. When our oldest son Samuel was a little boy, I used to take him to all the demonstrations, pro, anti, and we went to a pro-Palestinian demonstration. And the chant was, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The presidents of universities were asked about that. Let me explain to you. Samuel looked at me and said, what does that mean? I said, the river is the Jordan River. The sea is the Mediterranean Sea. And what's in between is Israel. And my little boy in those days looked at me and said, well, they're talking about the destruction of Israel, aren't they? And I said, you bet they are. And that's the lesson. There has to be a recognition that this kind of hatred, which manifests itself in this way, go to any Jewish community center, go to any synagogue, and you will see police presence these days because Jews feel we are under siege. And may I say, if we are under siege, so is democracy.
I just want to mention that Berkeley is being sued for anti-Semitism and the unchecked spread of anti-Semitism. I have no more time. I've got to wrap.
Well, you can't leave yet. You know, I have a reason for saying this. I want to wish Mark Godspeed on his trip to the Amazon. I am reminded of the cartoon of Theodore Roosevelt visiting the Amazon and all the animals running the other way for fear of Theodore Roosevelt.
Well, Theodore Roosevelt, they should run the other way. He was shooting everything that moved.
Maybe you guys can find it. It's online. You can.
Theodore Roosevelt killed more animals than the entire state of Kentucky kills in a year.
May I say, I don't want to horn in on anyone's
how
territory.
dare you?
But Mark Thompson Have a great time, and I will be thinking of you as the image of that cartoon, and may the animals all be blessed by your presence.
Thank you. Around the Political World with John Rothmann. John Rothmann, everybody. Bye, John Rothmann. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.